Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
Hello, Ilona Thompson with Palate Exposure. I'm here with Philippe Langner, and he is a vintner in Napa Valley. We just visited a beautiful vineyard called Kitoko in Atlas Peak. We're here to get to know him today. He has a very unusual background, an international man of mystery, I would say the headliner might be. So where were you born?
I was born in El Salvador.
Wow, how about that?
Yeah, a bit unusual for a Franco-German, but my dad worked for a German multinational in pharmaceuticals and chemicals called Höchst at the time. Now it's Aventis after a bunch of mergers and acquisitions.
Okay.
We then went to Bangladesh. Then we went to Colombia for 3 years. And then we went to Zaire, the very democratic Republic of Congo nowadays. And we stayed there longer. I lived there for 10 years because after 2 terms, my dad started his own business. And so he remained there until last year. And then I wasn't doing very much in school, so my parents kicked me into a boarding school in Switzerland.
Oh wow, what a change.
Oh, a big change. I didn't like the snow or the cold. And it was an international boarding school. In a way it was good for me because all those kids were from, their parents were all over the world, and they stayed in the school all year round, except because many other boarding schools you go in and you leave the weekends, whereas there all our parents were too far away, so we all stayed together. And it was a boarding school that did the French system, the Swiss system, and the English system. So half the school was English speaking. And I learned quite a bit of English that way, even though I was in the French system. So when I eventually came here to study, and that's part of the reason why I came here, because so many of my friends were coming to the US to study. I decided to try it, and it worked out. So I came here with a better understanding of English than otherwise.
You speak several languages, don't you? So French, German?
I speak French in order. French, English, Spanish, Italian, and German last. We always spoke French at home.
Oh, very good.
And then in Zaire was a French-speaking country, so my dad spoke French, and so we just...
I'm sure people tell you all the time they think you're from France, don't they?
They do when they know my name. Usually they pick up on my accent, but they can't place it unless they know. If I introduce myself as Philippe, automatically they'll know I'm French. But if I don't say it, they hear the accent, but they can't place it.
Wow. What was it like growing up in Zaire? I mean...
Oh, I loved it. Absolutely
paint us a
loved
picture.
it.
What was that?
It's fantastic. I mean, I was pretty wild. We had it was an expat life. We had a big garden, dogs, the pool, and school. It was a French school. Okay. But my parents were fairly adventurous, so we would go in the bush quite a bit, and I really loved that part. And then they had a huge farm about 6 hours away from the capital. And it was a cattle ranch. It was a huge pisciculture, fish farming project at the time, the biggest in Africa. They had gotten some loans from the World Bank. They had to plant some export crops, like some fruit trees, some coffee, some banana. But it was predominantly a cattle ranch. And for me, it was the best because I would go up there, and there were insects everywhere. I used to hunt butterflies, and anything that wasn't fast enough would end up in a jar. My mom wouldn't even go in my room anymore because it smelled so much of chemicals. But so for me, it was fantastic. I was running around everywhere with my big net, my butterfly net. And it was still, I don't know if they still have those anymore, but it was still pretty wild at the time. I mean, there were seasons when we had these flights of butterflies that would come out of the forest, like
Wow.
millions of them would just like cross over migrate basically for weeks. Or then it was the termite season when during reproduction they come out of their termite mounds and then fly up in the air, reproduce, and then they spread. But it's flights of millions of termites. So you see this as a kid, it's fascinating, it's absolutely fantastic.
It sounds almost like a Hollywood movie.
Well, I don't know, but it was super exciting as a kid. I loved it. Obviously, I didn't have the difficulties. It was hard for my parents, so especially for my mom, who wanted us to grow up with a Western food and culture.
Okay.
I mean, we got there in '73. There was no milk, there was no butter, very little bread. It was mostly local stuff. Obviously, with time was when that was after independence, and so the economy went better, and you could find everything you wanted at the end, like champagne and all that stuff. And then it collapsed during the Civil War. Obviously, it went pretty bad. But I only saw the adventure, the fun stuff. I didn't see the struggle my mom was going through to raise us properly. So I had the good side of it. And the advantage of it too at the time, I don't think it's true anymore, kids were sacred. Kids were untouchable, and like everybody, a kid can do what he wants. I could have gone to the worst neighborhoods and nothing would have happened to me.
Really?
I don't think it's the same way. But at the time, even though they were still very poor and it was a hard life, they would never harm a child. And so it's very safe in a way.
Wow. It's absolutely fascinating because, the rest of us have very little idea of what that must have been like.
Yeah. It was a big city.
Yeah.
3 million people at the time, but the expats community was pretty small.
Okay.
So in a way, it was like living in a village. Everybody knew everybody and what they were doing, and
Okay.
So it was a big city, but it was a village for the whites, and it was kind of a village.
Like a communal.
Communal,
Okay.
so.
You mentioned the food aspect of it.
Yes.
What were dinners like in your household?
It was French.
French.
A typical French
Classic.
dinner. Classic. Perhaps lighter than the average French dinner or lunch because of the heat. You really don't have sauces like those creamy stuff, and that's good for cold climates. But when it's hot, you're not hungry anyway.
Yeah.
And so a lot of salads and basically my mom's thing was you have to have proteins, carbohydrates, and vegetables. Balanced. And I continued that way.
Was your mom a great cook?
I thought so. It's still to this day.
Yeah. So you grew up watching her in the kitchen in a way.
We had a cook, but so she'd prepare because she worked at one point. She worked, so she didn't have time, but she'd make the menus and then double check, make sure at the end.
Yeah.
But it was great as a kid. We always had dessert, always had cake.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So there you were in Switzerland, very different environment.
Oh Lord,
it
yes.
had to have really been a shock to your system.
It was. I hated it because I had so much freedom over there. That obviously in boarding school it's completely regimented.
A lot of structure, which you're
very
not used
structured. I mean, we all slept in the dorms and on school. And I hated the food, absolutely hated the food. So my springs my diet consisted of bread, salad, and I'd go steal the neighbors' cherries in the trees.
What is it that you disliked about the food so much? Under-seasoned?
Yes, bland, lots of sauces. To this day, I don't like sauces. And yeah, it was my mom's food.
So what were some of the positive aspects of being in Switzerland? It's obviously a pretty cosmopolitan
It civilized
environment.
me.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Yeah.
It was good for my education. I really needed it
Yeah.
because I really wasn't doing very much at all over there. I was
You have a
distracted.
free spirit, yeah.
And there's no other way around it. And so I had to do it. It was a good thing.
And you made a lot of friends, it sounds like.
I made a bunch of friends, and we've kept in touch. But much better, much easier now with the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, it was writing letters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you said some of them moved to the U.S. or went to the U.S. for various purposes.
Yes,
and you were
for
curious
school,
about it.
and then but we were all scattered because we were all. I mean, there were kids from everywhere, from the U.S., from Japan, from different African countries, from the Middle East, from Iran, and European countries. So I mean, we just scattered all over.
Got it. How old were you when you first came to the U.S.?
I was 19.
Wow. So you came where?
I arrived at Cal State Hayward.
Cal State Hayward.
I know, it was Cal State Hayward at the time.
That
I experienced Hayward, a lovely city, and then I transferred to UC Davis.
Okay. Yeah. So at Hayward you were studying?
So initially I came in with a language program, but I always, ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to study agriculture. It was always a passion of mine to grow plants and crops. Plants in general. And so I always had it in my mind, and with my parents' experience with the farm in Zaire, and in the middle of that, my dad bought a ranch in Colombia, and so we'd go in the summer in the ranch, the cattle ranch in Colombia. But so I was really into that life and the nature and the environment, and so for me, I always wanted to do it ever since I was a kid. And Davis was really, my parents pushed me to apply to Davis because it was a very important university for the Green Revolution that raised yields of crops, of major crops, like corn, rice, wheat in the third world. It was an agricultural revolution, and Davis was really instrumental in it. So they had heard about it. They said, it's a really good school, try it, apply. And they took me, surprise, surprise.
Wow. And what was your major?
And so I did my undergrad in agronomy.
Okay.
And then I had to do my military service in France. It was still compulsory at the time. I had not a choice. And then I came back to Davis and I did 2 masters, one in agronomy and one in agricultural economics.
Okay.
And because I wanted to work in the third world in agricultural development or in plantations, because that had been my life and that's the life I liked. So after my master's I went to France, stayed in Paris for a while. I tried banking for 6 months because my sister was in banking and finance and she really loved it. Her friends were super fun and they loved it. I had taken some finance classes in my Ag-Econ. And I thought, well, these are nice people, fun people. I'll try it. I hated it, absolutely hated it. And so I lasted only 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, I went and I saw the owner of the bank, and I said, listen, thank you so much for the opportunity, but I really don't like it. He was very surprised because he was a banker from generations. And I said, honestly, I'm not helping you out here. I'm totally useless in this stuff. And so I said, okay, thank you, bye-bye. And so I started looking for work in an NGO. And in France, they're very, very leftist in their NGOs, or very Catholic, religious, and I'm not religious, so I couldn't pretend otherwise. And the NGOs, they're like, why did you study in the US? And I'm, I was like, well, Davis, Green Revolution, really good. So it didn't work out in the end. And so the same owners of the bank said, listen, we have a chateau in Bordeaux. Go see if you like it. I wasn't very enthusiastic about it, but I thought it beats not working. So I went and tried it, and really completely unexpectedly, I fell in love with it. I found it so fascinating. Everything that you can do in the vineyards in terms to tweak the vines, to get, first of all, to adapt to your vintage, whether it's different every year, and then to try to achieve the best possible results according to what you're trying to do, as the type of wine you're trying to do. So I spent a lot of time working in the vineyards, Sometimes in winter I was wondering why the hell I was pruning when it was super cold and I had 2 masters. But I stuck it out because you have to know these things. You have to know. I figured eventually I'd run, a business or a vineyards, and you have to know what you're going to ask other people to do. That's part of your job, and if you don't do it, you will never really know what it means. Not only in terms of pruning or suckering, deleafing hour after hour, day after day after day, what it means physically. But also by doing it so much, you become really good at it. And then now that when I walk in a vineyard, I see immediately what's going on. But you have to spend the time doing it. There's no way around it. And so I stuck it out. Same in the cellar as a cellar rat, pulling hoses, doing pump overs, cleaning, and whatever was needed, I just had to learn. Obviously, they were very nice with me because I knew the owners, but. And then I was so curious, I read a whole bunch. I had to take a course at Bordeaux University because initially it all tasted the same to me. And it was a mystery, and I was like, why are you saying this one's so much better than that one? It was the viticulturist at Chateau Clark where I ended up that was my mentor because he was so passionate about it. And he would take me to all these tastings, and we'd do tasting at his home, and he was trying to pass on the passion and the knowledge. And so he said, look, go take a class because clearly you need it.
Like a sensory class?
So yes, it was a 1-week class, 2 hours of theory in the morning, 2 hours of practice, then lunch, same in the afternoon. And it was really eye-opening because you dissect the wine, you try the individual molecules, the different oak additives that you can put in wine, the different oak barrels, fruit from different areas, the different techniques you can apply in the cellar, and the end results, and then, or you would taste the individual molecules of the aromas of mint, of lemon, of walnut, or whatever, all these individual molecules to recognize them, and then you try the wine and try to find it in the wine. So it's a super fun and interesting exercise, very important if it's your job, but I find it fun anyways. Because, for example, when you taste the wine, lemon, lime, mandarin, tangerine, orange, pomelo, these are all different flavors, different aromas. Sometimes people just put them all together, citrus. But if you're attentive enough, if you've gone through these courses, then you can tease it out. And it's technically it's important, but it's also a lot of fun.
Do you believe it's possible to learn how to taste at that level so you can discern very refined individual components? Can anybody learn that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's a training. After that, we all have different natural thresholds. Mm-hmm. And they're different for every molecule and for everybody. Mm-hmm. I can have a very low threshold on some molecules that you're not very sensitive to, but you might be much more sensitive than me on other molecules. So with training, you can drop that level, but then there's a floor below which you won't go. You just don't have the cells to perceive it.
Okay.
So yes, you can learn it.
I want to go back for a second. When you said you fell in love unexpectedly when you landed at Chateau Clark, what was that moment like? How did it happen? When did you have that aha realization?
I don't think it was really a single moment.
Okay.
I was just like learning. So I like learning.
Yeah.
And so I was learning so much. And not only the theory, but it was practical this time. And it was just like, I was just really happy. I was learning all this stuff, and in both the vineyard and the cellar. So it didn't get too boring. And towards the end, a little more in the marketing and the sales side. But very quickly, I was like, wow. Because initially, I had a very simplistic view of winemaking. I thought, you just grow it, press it, bottle it, whatever. It's so much more complicated than that. But that's the fun of it, is actually that whole process.
You became an unexpected and accidental winemaker.
Yes, because I even didn't really drink that much wine or alcohol in general. I was just like, okay, well, there's wine, I'll have it, but it's not something that I would look for. And it was really eye-opening, and it was very unexpected.
What was the first wine you tried that you found memorable, that had that stamina that you noted?
The first wine that really stunned me, it sounds cliche, but it was a Lafite. And I have no idea of the vintage. And I was not interested in wine at the time. It was my sister had graduated from university, Pace University in New York.
Okay.
And we had a graduation dinner at La Grenouille, which was an excellent, I don't know if they still exist, in New York, excellent French restaurant. And that wine just blew me away. But I couldn't tell you what or why. I don't even know the vintage anymore. Because I didn't pay attention. I was like, oh, this is really good. The whole meal was delicious, but the wine I remembered. And then my sister ended up marrying in the family, so I had access to the very good cellar of the winery when my sister was there. I didn't abuse it. So when she'd come, I'd be like, hey, we got to try these wines. I think they're getting old, and maybe they're bad. We got to try them.
Well, now you've opened the can of worms. We have to live vicariously through you.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about your pillaging of Lafitte's.
So there wasn't Lafitte cellar. It was Chateau Clark's cellar.
Chateau Clark's cellar.
But there was a lot of Lafitte in it. And so the old man had bought, so this is the Rothschild family. So the Edmund, my brother-in-law, his father, had invested in a company called Le Savour Club, which was a mail order wine company. And they had a lot of samples still from that period in the cellar. That's how I discovered Zinfandel before coming here. And really good Zinfandel, made in the 80s, more in the Claret style.
Okay.
And we had some pretty extraordinary wines in the cellar. There's some that had lost their labels. There was a 1945 Châteauneuf du Pape, but we don't know the chateau. And then one day I told my sister, no, I mean, come on, we have to try this. You have all these bottles. I mean, maybe it's just manure. I mean, I didn't expect it to be good. It was so alive still. It was fantastic. We were floored. We were like, 1945, this is crazy. But on there, like, there was one that I always remember was La Conseillante, 1970. Extraordinary. I mean, such finesse, such just so easy, so light, complex, and just fantastic. Just like so light, so elegant.
Did you at that point realize that wine?
At that point, I knew enough.
Has special.
Yes, at that point, I knew enough about wine to like go, wow, this is so delicious.
Yeah.
And not in a big, massive, blousy way. It was just all about its finesse. And it's funny because years later I met the family, the owners of it's a close-knit family who owns the chateau, and I was invited. I think it was the grandson of the guy who, he was his nephew. And I said, oh, you made one of the best wines I've ever had. He's like, oh, it's so funny. We had such a heavy crop that vintage. I could only keep the grapes in there for 10 days, and we had to empty our tanks to put more grapes in it. Wow. And it was an amazing wine. So sometimes you wonder, we make it complicated at times, when if the fruit is good, simplicity is so much better.
I like that word they used, blouse. We'll go back to that one later on, because obviously your early influence had to have been the wines of elegance.
Yes.
And that must have filed away.
Yeah. And what is funny, because I enjoyed those wines, but in a way I made my palate on old-style Bordeaux. When the wines were pretty extracted, they were hard in their use, but developed beautifully with time. And I've remained with that model. That's still what I do. Bordeaux has really evolved in its winemaking philosophy. The wines are much more approachable early on. In 2015, I was back in Bordeaux for Vinexpo, and with the people I know, I managed to have a few tastings technical tastings with really good chateaus, like L'Evangile, Lafite, or things like that. And I was stunned by the finesse, the extreme finesse of the wines. I was like, where is this going? It's so fine, so elegant. I wonder how people are going to understand those wines. Because even I was kind of thrown off by the lightness of it. But I guess they know what they're doing. And so stylistically, Bordeaux has changed quite a bit. They're also very attuned to the market because they sell a lot of wine. So they understand that people don't have cellars anymore, and that they don't hold wine the way people used to before in Europe. You know, you'd buy a wine in your later years understanding that it was for your children. But they had inherited from their family a pretty good cellar with old wines. So it was these cellars that rotated within families. But nowadays, most people don't have the space for a cellar.
True.
And so they know that. So they make wines that are more approachable early now.
Starting to feel nostalgic because it sounds like economics and the logistics are dictating.
The wines are really good. I mean, I think in a way, these past 20, 30 years, winemaking's made tremendous progress technologically and also in the understanding of the biology of wine. And in the vineyard, we work much better too than we used to. So I think in a way, the wines are better. Stylistically, they're different, but they're really excellent wines coming out, no doubt. It's just different style, but that's life, you know. Everything changes and evolves.
Yeah, that's actually the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So there you were at Chateau Clark, working hard, but enjoying everything. We know that you've learned early on what you don't like, and now you've discovered what you love.
Yes.
What was the next step?
So after Chateau Clark, towards the end, the Rothschilds have a joint venture in South Africa called R&R, Vigneron, I think, Fredericksburg. Okay. So I spent a crush over there and loved it. It's beautiful, absolutely mind-boggling. It's so beautiful. And I love nature and gardening, and South Africa is the tip of South Africa is the most diverse flora in the world. A lot of our plants, ornamental plants here, at least a third of our plants in the garden are actually originary of South Africa.
How about that?
Because it's a very old land, very old soils that are poor in different minerals or toxic for certain minerals that accumulate through time. And so you can have a certain same plant but slightly different on the other side of the mountain because it's in a different soil, a slightly different climate, and it's such an old land that it had all these millions of years to evolve. And they still have some of that Gondwana old vegetation, few, but still some remnant, really old plants. So for me, it was fascinating. And at the end of it, I took a backpacker's trip through the coast of the Atlantic coast of South Africa into Namibia, and then Botswana, the Okavango Delta, and ended up at the Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. And then
the conclusion of this interview can be found in the next podcast, already available for your download. Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson.